A dog discovers an abandoned baby in the trash and races to the hospital. But when the doctor sees the child, what he uncovers sends chills down his spine. The fading light of the setting sun stretched across the sleepy streets of Maplewood, a tranquil suburb nestled on the outskirts of Chicago. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a solitary figure emerged from the shadows of an alley near Birch Avenue's row of charming brick homes. Buddy, an aging golden retriever, mixed with a muzzle speckled in grey and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of countless years, moved deliberately along the pavement, his weary paws pressing softly against the cool surface. Buddy had once been the pride of a loving family, but life had taken a cruel turn when his elderly owner passed away. Left without a home, he now wandered Maplewood streets, a gentle drifter who had unknowingly earned the affection of its residents. Despite efforts to take him to shelters or find him a permanent home, Buddy always eluded capture, choosing the open air and freedom over confinement. Tonight, like so many nights, he made his usual rounds, his nose catching familiar scents as he approached the corner of Pine and Fifth. Here, Mrs. Penelope, a kind-hearted widow, routinely left a bowl of water and a handful of kibble on her porch. Buddy eagerly drank from the cool water, his tail wagging in a quiet expression of gratitude. "There you are, you old troublemaker," Mrs. Penelope called softly from her window. "Be safe out there tonight, you hear?" Buddy tilted his head toward her voice, his warm brown eyes glimmering with understanding. He let out a soft woof in reply before continuing his journey, the tantalizing aroma of dinners wafting from nearby homes, teasing his sensitive nose. As Buddy wandered closer to Maplewood Community Park, an unusual sound stopped him in his tracks. His ears perked, swiveling as he strained to identify the faint, high-pitched cry. It wasn't like anything he'd heard before, and something deep within him stirred, a primal instinct that demanded he investigate. Veering from his usual route, Buddy followed the sound into the darkened park, his curiosity tinged with concern. The cries grew louder as he neared a cluster of trash bins by the playground. His nose working overtime, Buddy sniffed his way around the bins, his heart thumping with urgency. At the final bin, he reared up on his hind legs, his front paws resting against the metal as he peered inside. What he found made his breath catch. Amidst crumpled papers and discarded fast food wrappers was a tiny, wriggling bundle. A baby, no more than a few days old. Wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket, the infant's face was flushed with distress as it released weak, desperate cries. Buddy froze momentarily, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he'd discovered. Then, instinct took over. With surprising delicacy, he clamped his teeth gently around the edge of the blanket and lifted the baby free from the bin. The infant's cries softened, sensing the warmth and safety of the old dog's fur. Cradling the fragile bundle carefully, Buddy turned back toward the street, his mind racing. The baby was cold and its cries were growing fainter. Time was of the essence. His legs carried him with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He needed help, and fast. A memory stirred in his mind. Eleanor, the retired nurse who lived in the blue house on Willow Lane. Buddy had often seen her tending to injured animals in her garden. If anyone could save the baby, it would be Eleanor. Fueled by newfound resolve, Buddy quickened his pace, though his aging body protested with every step. As he moved through the streets, a few late-night pedestrians stopped in their tracks, stunned by the sight of an old dog carrying what appeared to be a baby. A teenage boy on a bike nearly lost his balance, staring in disbelief as Buddy trotted past. But the dog paid them no mind. His focus was solely on reaching Eleanor's house. When Buddy turned onto Willow Lane, he spotted the glow of Eleanor's porch light in the distance. His legs trembled under the strain, but he refused to slow down. The baby's fragile life depended on him. Step by step, he pressed on, his determination unwavering. At last, Buddy reached the porch of the blue house, his body nearly spent. He gently placed the baby on the welcome mat, nudging the blanket to ensure the little one was snug and warm. Then, summoning every ounce of strength left in his weary body, Buddy let out a sharp, urgent bark. Through the window, he saw Eleanor flinch, startled, and look up from the book she had been reading. Buddy barked again, louder this time, his eyes fixed on the door. He prayed she would come quickly. This child's life depended on it. The infant stirred, letting out a weak, fragile cry. As Eleanor's steps neared the door, Buddy instinctively stepped back, his heart thundering in his chest. He had done all he could. Now it was up to Eleanor to ensure this fragile life would survive. The porch light flickered on, illuminating the shadows, and the door began to creak open. Eleanor Shaw's eyes widened in stunned disbelief. At first, she only noticed Buddy, the scruffy neighborhood stray she'd admired from a distance. But then her gaze fell to the small bundle resting at his paws. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered, dropping to her knees. Her hands trembled as she reached for the blanket, her instincts as a seasoned nurse surging to the surface. As she peeled back the fabric, a tiny face emerged, pale and tinged with a dangerous blue from the cold. "You poor, poor little one," she murmured softly, gathering the baby close to her chest. Buddy let out a low whine, his tail wagging hesitantly as if seeking reassurance. Eleanor glanced at him, her expression a mix of astonishment and profound gratitude. "You brilliant boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've just saved a life." Clutching the infant, Eleanor hurried into the house, Buddy trotting behind her, unwilling to abandon his mission. In the comforting glow of her living room, Eleanor moved quickly, her experienced hands assessing the infant's condition. The baby was dangerously cold, its tiny breaths shallow and irregular. "Hang on, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered, her mind flashing back to her decades in the NICU at Chicago Memorial Hospital. It had been years since she'd cared for a newborn, but the rhythm of those days came rushing back as if no time had passed. With practiced efficiency, she warmed towels and began rubbing the baby's limbs, her heart aching for the fragile child in her arms. Memories of her 30 years as a neonatal nurse came flooding back, holding fragile lives in her hands, comforting terrified parents, and celebrating hard-won victories. Retirement had left her feeling untethered, but in this moment, Eleanor felt that same sense of purpose reigniting in her soul. Grabbing her phone, she dialed 911. "Emergency services. What's your situation?" the operator's calm voice asked. "This is Eleanor Shaw at 1542 Sycamore Street," she said, her voice steady despite the urgency in her chest. "I have a newborn, likely just a few days old, suffering from severe hypothermia. I need an ambulance right away." As she detailed the situation, Eleanor continued her life-saving efforts. Gradually, the baby's color shifted from an alarming blue to a healthier pink, and its cries grew louder and stronger. Buddy sat nearby, watching intently, his occasional whines seeming like words of encouragement. In a matter of minutes, sirens pierced the night air. The front door swung open and two paramedics, a young woman named Aisha and her older partner Frank, entered briskly. "Over here!" Eleanor called out, still cradling the baby tightly. The paramedics took in the unusual scene, Eleanor, the baby, and the vigilant dog, before springing into action. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened?" Aisha asked, already unpacking her medical kit and kneeling beside Eleanor. As Eleanor recounted Buddy's extraordinary rescue, both paramedics glanced at the old dog in amazement. "I've been on the job 20 years, Frank said, shaking his head in awe. "But I've never seen anything like this. That dog's a hero." Aisha carefully prepared the baby for transport, but Eleanor hesitated. "I worked as a NICU nurse for 3 decades, she said, her voice tinged with both urgency and longing. "Would it be possible for me to ride along? I might be able to help." Frank and Aisha exchanged a look before nodding. "Your expertise might make all the difference," Frank agreed. As they made their way to the ambulance, Buddy started to follow, his determination clear. Eleanor glanced down at him. "Oh, we can't leave him behind," she insisted firmly. "He saved this baby. He deserves to see this through." Moved by the extraordinary circumstances, the paramedics broke protocol and allowed Buddy into the ambulance. He settled at Eleanor's feet, his watchful eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in her arms as they raced through the night, united in their mission to save a life. As they raced toward Chicago Memorial Hospital, Eleanor cradled the baby tightly, her hands trembling but resolute, while Buddy's head lay protectively on her lap. The ambulance screeched to a halt, and they were met by Dr. Nolan Hart, the pediatrician on call. His expression shifted to one of incredulous surprise as he observed the unusual entourage stepping out. 2 paramedics, an older woman, a dog, and a fragile infant. "Dr. Hart," Eleanor said, her voice laced with urgency and familiarity as she recognized her former colleague. "This baby needs immediate attention, and you won't believe how it got here." As they rushed inside, Eleanor quickly recounted the incredible tale of the rescue, her words punctuated by glances at the baby's pale face. Dr. Hart grew visibly pale as he examined the child. "My God," he murmured, his voice thick with dread. "If that dog hadn't found this baby—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The weight of what might have been hung heavy in the air. The ER buzzed with controlled chaos as the medical team fought to stabilize the infant. Eleanor, slipping naturally back into her role as a nurse, assisted with practiced precision. Dr. Hart, initially skeptical of Eleanor's presence, let alone Buddy's, soon realized her skills and the dog's calming effect were invaluable. Time blurred, marked only by the relentless ticking of the clock and the quiet hum of machines. When the first light of dawn broke through the hospital windows, Dr. Hart approached Eleanor, who sat slumped in a chair with Buddy faithfully at her feet. His face bore the strain of the night. "Eleanor," he began, his tone solemn, "we've managed to stabilize the baby, but we've uncovered a rare congenital condition. This little one is going to need ongoing, specialized care." Eleanor's chest tightened. After everything, now this? She glanced at Buddy, whose eyes radiated a calm resolve. That look stirred something in her. "I'm staying," she declared, her voice steady with determination. "This baby needs all the help it can get, and retired or not, I still have plenty to give." Dr. Hart nodded, a small, tired smile lifting the corners of his mouth. "I was hoping you'd say that. We'll need your expertise, especially for a case like this." As the morning sun bathed the hospital in a warm, golden light, Eleanor felt a sense of renewed purpose. She looked at Buddy, her ever-faithful companion, and then at the fragile infant in the NICU, fighting to cling to life. The road ahead was daunting, but Eleanor knew they would face it together. Little did she know, the twists and turns in their journey were only beginning. By mid-morning, the pediatric wing was alive with a quiet buzz. Word of the miraculous rescue, a stray dog saving an abandoned infant, had spread throughout the hospital, capturing hearts and sparking conversations. Eleanor, Buddy, and the baby, now lovingly called Baby Hope by the staff, were the unlikely heroes at the center of it all. Detective Grace Alvarez of the Chicago PD strode purposefully down the corridor, her sharp, observant eyes scanning her surroundings. Assigned to the case, she was determined to uncover the truth behind Baby Hope's abandonment. As she neared the NICU, she spotted Eleanor dozing in a chair, Buddy lying protectively at her feet. "Mrs. Shaw," Alvarez said softly, her voice gentle as she woke Eleanor. Eleanor stirred, blinking away sleep. "Detective Alvarez," she murmured. "Any updates?" Alvarez shook her head, a trace of regret in her eyes. "Not yet, but we're making progress. I wanted to ask you a few more questions and let you know where we're at." Eleanor nodded, her focus sharpening. As Alvarez explained their efforts, checking surveillance footage from the park and issuing alerts, she couldn't help but admire Eleanor's unwavering resolve. It was clear that both Eleanor and Buddy had forged a deep bond with Baby Hope, and their determination was unshakable. "These cases," Alvarez warned gently, "aren't always straightforward. They can take time, and sometimes they don't end the way we hope." Eleanor's expression darkened but remained resolute. "I understand," she said firmly, absently stroking Buddy's head. "But this baby deserves to know where they came from. We can't give up." Before Alvarez could respond, a commotion erupted down the hall. A man in a sharp suit stood arguing heatedly with a nurse, his raised voice cutting through the quiet. "I don't care about your policies," he barked. "That dog is a stray and a health risk. It needs to be removed and sent to a shelter immediately." Eleanor stiffened, her face flushing with anger. She shot an apologetic glance at Alvarez. "Excuse me, detective," she said curtly before marching toward the confrontation, Buddy trotting close behind. As they neared the scene, Eleanor's sharp eyes recognized the man, Gerald Hawkins, the overly ambitious head of the town's animal control. Their history wasn't exactly friendly. He'd clashed with her several times when she spoke up for the stray animals in the area. "Mr. Hawkins," Eleanor called out, her tone firm and steady. "Buddy isn't just some ordinary stray. He's a hero, a dog who saved a baby's life. He deserves to stay here." Hawkins turned slowly, his expression hardening as his gaze met hers. "Mrs. Shaw," he sneered, "I should have guessed you'd be involved. Hero or not, rules are rules. That dog needs to come with me." The rising tension drew Dr. Hart, who approached with a calm but curious demeanor. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice cutting through the heated exchange. As Eleanor and Hawkins explained the situation, Dr. Hart tilted his head thoughtfully. "Mr. Hawkins," he began, "I understand your position, but Buddy has been an incredible comfort to Baby Hope. In fact," he hesitated, then continued, "what if we officially registered Buddy as a therapy dog in training?" Eleanor's face lit up at the suggestion, her relief palpable, but Hawkins shook his head with a scoff. "That's not how it works. There are procedures, certifications, which will expedite," Dr. Hart interrupted smoothly. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, I believe we can make an exception. In the meantime, I'll personally vouch for Buddy's presence here." Hawkins bristled, his frustration visible, but he couldn't argue against the doctor's authority. "Fine," he muttered begrudgingly, shooting one last glare at Buddy. "But I'll be keeping an eye on this." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off. As the tension ebbed, Eleanor looked to Dr. Hart with heartfelt gratitude. "Thank you, Nolan. I don't know what we'd do if Buddy had to leave." Dr. Hart offered her a small smile, though his eyes carried a weight of concern. "It's the least I could do," he replied softly. "But Eleanor, we need to discuss baby Hope's latest test results." His voice grew more serious as he continued, "The condition is called tetralogy of Fallot, with pulmonary atresia. It's a complex congenital heart defect that will require highly specialized surgery." Eleanor inhaled sharply, the gravity of his words sinking in. As a seasoned nurse, she understood all too well what this meant. "Oh, Nolan," she murmured, "what are the chances?" Dr. Hart rubbed a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his inner turmoil. "It's high risk," he admitted, "especially for a newborn this fragile, but it's our only option." As he delved into the intricate details of the procedure, Eleanor noticed a flicker of something unresolved in his expression. "Nolan," she pressed gently, "there's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" He sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his confession. "During my residency, I performed this surgery once before," he admitted. "The baby didn't survive. I've avoided pediatric cardiology ever since." Eleanor reached out, placing a supportive hand on his arm. "Nolan, that was years ago," she said firmly. "You're one of the most skilled doctors I know. If anyone can do this, it's you." Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse hurrying into the room. "Dr. Hart, Mrs. Shaw," she began breathlessly. "There's a couple in the waiting room claiming to be baby Hope's parents." Eleanor and Dr. Hart exchanged startled looks before quickly heading to the waiting area, Buddy close on their heels. There, they found Detective Alvarez speaking to a young couple. The pair seemed nervous but determined. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker," Detective Alvarez introduced as the group approached. "This is Mrs. Shaw and Dr. Hart, who've been looking after the baby." The woman stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Our baby girl?" Eleanor felt a complicated rush of emotions. Relief that baby Hope's parents might have been found mingled with a strange sense of unease. Something about the couple's demeanor didn't sit right. Their movements felt too calculated, their words strangely devoid of the raw anguish Eleanor expected. Detective Alvarez, ever meticulous, began questioning them about the circumstances of the baby's abandonment. Eleanor observed the exchange closely, her instincts tingling. Their responses felt rehearsed, the edges of their story too smooth to be genuine. Buddy, who had been silently sitting by Eleanor's side, suddenly let out a low growl. His sharp gaze fixed on the couple. The man flinched and instinctively stepped back. "Keep that dog away from us," he snapped. Detective Alvarez narrowed her eyes. "Is there a problem, Mr. Whitaker?" Under her sharp scrutiny, combined with Eleanor's piercing gaze and Buddy's unrelenting presence, the couple's facade began to crack. Bit by bit, their carefully constructed story unraveled, leaving their true intentions exposed. All right," the woman exclaimed, her voice shaking. "We're not her parents. We heard about the reward. We thought if we could claim her, we might—" Detective Alvarez interrupted, her tone icy. "You're both under arrest for attempted fraud and obstruction of a police investigation." As officers led the impostors away, Eleanor felt a bittersweet wave of emotions, disappointment mingling with relief. She glanced down at Buddy, who had visibly relaxed, his keen instincts proven right, once again. Gently scratching behind his ears, she murmured, "Good boy. You knew, didn't you?" Dr. Hart, who had silently observed the chaotic scene, shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. I can't believe someone would stoop so low as to exploit a situation like this. Eleanor sighed, her voice soft but resolute. People can surprise you, for better or worse. Their brief moment of reflection shattered as Dr. Hart pager beeped sharply. His expression darkened as he scanned the screen. "It's Hope," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Her condition's worsening. We need to operate immediately." Eleanor's pulse quickened. Without hesitation, they rushed back to the NICU. The medical team moved swiftly, prepping for emergency surgery. Eleanor lingered nearby, her hands clasped tightly as she whispered, "Hold on, little one. You've come too far for us to lose you now." With Buddy at her side, she watched as the team wheeled baby Hope into the operating room, Dr. Hart leading the charge. As the doors swung shut, a heavy silence settled over Eleanor. Her heart pounded with the ominous certainty that the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. The hours dragged on like an eternity. Eleanor stayed rooted outside the operating room, one hand resting on Buddy's head. The faithful dog sat unmoving, his soulful brown eyes fixed on the doors as if willing them to open. Nurses and doctors came and went, their faces unreadable. Each time the doors shifted, Eleanor's breath hitched, hoping for news. Finally, as dusk gave way to the deep blue of night, Dr. Hart emerged. His surgical cap clutched in his hand, exhaustion etched into his features. Eleanor stumbled to her feet, her legs trembling. "Nolan?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He looked at her, and for a moment her world stood still. Then a smile broke through the weariness on his face. "She made it, Eleanor. It was close, but she's pulled through. She's a fighter." Relief flooded her, so overwhelming that she had to sit down again. Buddy let out a soft, celebratory bark, sensing the shift in mood. Dr. Hart took a breath before continuing, his expression sobering. "There's more. Detective Alvarez is here. They've found her mother." As if on cue, Detective Alvarez appeared around the corner, guiding a young girl. She couldn't have been older than 16, her face blotchy from crying, her hands twisting nervously. "Mrs. Shaw, Dr. Hart," Alvarez said, her voice gentle. "This is Claire Summers, baby Hope's mother." The girl looked up, her tearful eyes wide with fear and hope. "Is my baby okay?" she stammered. "I didn't know what to do. I was so scared." Eleanor's heart broke for the young girl. Rising, she approached her with a warm, steadying presence, taking Claire's trembling hands. "Your baby's going to be just fine, sweetheart. She's strong, just like her mom." Claire crumbled into tears, and Eleanor led her to a nearby chair. As she comforted her, the girl's story spilled out. Claire, a straight-A student with dreams of becoming a doctor, had made one impulsive mistake at a party. The unplanned pregnancy had turned her world upside down. Terrified of disappointing her strict parents and derailing her future, she had concealed the pregnancy, eventually giving birth alone in her bedroom. "I panicked," Claire sobbed. "I didn't know what else to do. I wrapped her up and left her at the park, thinking someone would find her quickly. But as soon as I got home, I realized how wrong I was. I've been trying to find the courage to come forward ever since." Detective Alvarez, who had been quietly listening, stepped in. "Claire turned herself in earlier today," she explained. "Considering the circumstances and her cooperation, we're working with the DA to make sure she's treated fairly." Eleanor glanced at Claire, who sat huddled in the chair, tears streaming down her face. "You've been through so much," Eleanor said softly, her voice steady. "But you've taken the first step toward making it right. That takes courage." As Claire nodded through her tears, Eleanor squeezed her hand, silently promising to help her find a way forward for both her and baby Hope. Dr. Hart, who had been silent until then, cleared his throat softly, drawing everyone's attention. "Claire, your daughter has a condition called tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia. It's a severe heart defect, but we've already performed the necessary corrective surgery. She'll need consistent care moving forward, but with the right treatment, she can live a full, healthy life." Claire's breath caught, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and guilt. She whispered, almost to herself, "Oh God, if I'd known, I never would have. Can I see her, please?" Dr. Hart gave a gentle nod, his expression warm with understanding. "She's in recovery now. I think being with her would be good for both of you." As they prepared to head to the recovery room, Eleanor felt a tug on her sleeve. Turning, she saw Detective Alvarez standing nearby, her lips curving into a faint smile. "There's one more thing," Alvarez said, holding up a tablet. "We found security footage from the park. You might want to see this." She pressed play, and the video captured Buddy, the old stray dog, discovering the baby. What unfolded next left Eleanor speechless. The dog had attempted to alert several people passing by, but each ignored him, dismissing the stray. Finally, Buddy had taken matters into his own paws. Gently, he had picked up the tiny bundle and set off on his journey, determined to find help. "He knew exactly what he was doing," Alvarez said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's like he understood the baby needed more than just a passerby." Eleanor dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around Buddy's scruffy neck. "You brilliant, incredible boy," she murmured, tears streaming down her face. "You're not just a hero, you're a guardian angel." Over the days that followed, the story of baby Hope, now officially named Lily Hope Summers, unfolded like a miracle. Claire's parents, initially shaken and overwhelmed, rallied around their daughter and granddaughter with love, determination, and unwavering support. Social services stepped in, working closely with the family to ensure Claire and Lily had everything they needed to build a stable life together. Eleanor, unable to let go of Lily's case, decided to come out of retirement. She returned part-time to the NICU, where she could continue supporting families like Claire's. Buddy, by now a local legend, became the hospital's newest therapy dog in training, offering comfort and love to patients and staff alike. Dr. Hart, deeply inspired by Lily's successful surgery and Eleanor's dedication, resolved to specialize in pediatric cardiology. He saw it as a chance to help countless children like Lily, giving their families hope for brighter futures. As for Buddy, his heroic actions captured hearts across the city. Donations flooded in to ensure his care, and Eleanor officially adopted him, giving the loyal dog the safe and loving home he had always deserved. One crisp afternoon, about a month after that life-changing night, Eleanor sat on a bench in Oakwood Community Park. Buddy sprawled lazily at her feet, soaking up the sunshine, while she cradled little Lily in her arms. The baby, now thriving, gurgled happily as Eleanor gently rocked her. Beside them, Claire sat with a contented smile, her fingers brushing over her daughter's tiny hands. She looked around the park, her voice soft. "I never thought I'd come back here, but now it feels like a beginning, not an ending." Eleanor's lips curved into a warm smile as she watched a butterfly flutter down, landing briefly on Buddy's nose before flying away. The old dog sneezed, earning a laugh from Claire. "Life has a funny way of giving us second chances," Eleanor mused aloud. "Sometimes we just need someone to lead us to them." As if he understood her words, Buddy lifted his head, meeting Eleanor's gaze with his soulful brown eyes. In that shared moment, Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This park, once the scene of so much pain and uncertainty, now stood as a symbol of hope and renewal. It was a place where lives had intertwined in the most unexpected ways, proving that even in the darkest hours, help could come in the unlikeliest form. A paw, a kind soul, a leap of faith. Lily cooed and reached out, her tiny fingers brushing against Buddy's fur. Eleanor smiled, her heart full. Their incredible journey wasn't ending here. In so many ways, it was just beginning. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next heartwarming tale.